Hello and welcome to the Royal Chronicles. We're back.
Luke is back. How long's it been?
3 months.
Good grief.
Yeah, winter and early spring is our busy season here in Central Florida.
That's true.
But we're glad to be back, and we're continuing a series that we started of firsts. Mm-hmm. So monarchs who were either the first in their family to rule, or first ruler of a particular country, or first to rule in a particular way.
And that sound was our executive producer. Gotta have your Red Bull. Not sponsored, obviously. Anyways.
So you've got the oldest one we've ever done on the show today.
I think you're right about
that.
The
oldest individual and society.
Yes. We're going to be discussing, but I've been focusing on Hammurabi, famous for his code. The Code of Hammurabi. Who do you have?
Today I have Alexander the Great.
Yes. Very famous, very well known. I feel like they're both very well known in history.
Yeah, at least, in our education they were.
Yeah. All right.
So they're just kind of basic touchstones for different periods of history. Hammurabi's kind of like the beginning of cities and written laws.
Yeah.
I'm a descendant.
Are you direct descendant of Hammurabi? I know, you're from Babylon. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. Crazy to think about. Okay, so who's going first?
I think you should go first.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
Okay. So, to be technical, Hammurabi is not exactly the first. The first, and I was instructed on how to pronounce this, was someone named Sargon of Akkad. Mm-hmm. Sargon of Akkad. He established the Akkadian Empire. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that, the Akkadians. But there's so little information about him, and I'm predominantly interested in Hammurabi's code and his, legal system and all of that. But I just wanted to say, I'm aware he's not the very, very first, but there just wasn't enough information about this first guy to do a whole episode. So, I will just, the quick little bit that I have about him, Sargon, as I said, he established the Akkadian Empire. It was the first Semitic speaking empire in Mesopotamia. He conquered much of, what's it called? Sumer.
So in Arabic, it's Somer.
In Arabic, it's Somer. Is that right?
Which is what is known right now as Baghdad, and you go all the way south to what's called now Basra and Kuwait. That's the Somer land, which is Mesopotamia.
Okay.
Which is the land between the two rivers.
So it's predominantly now Baghdad.
Somer, huh?
Somer. Yeah. What's now known as Baghdad.
The center was Babylon.
Okay.
It's everything between the rivers, basically.
Okay. Well, anyway, his empire is seen.
Which is Sumer, where the Sumerians comes from.
Mm-hmm. Sumerians. That makes sense. His empire was thought to be the precursor to later empires, such as the Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi. And that brings us to Hammurabi. As I said, he is probably most well known for the Code of Hammurabi, which it's kind of advertised as like the first real legal code, I suppose. I don't know that we could definitely say that no legal code ever existed before, but before him. But maybe we don't have that much evidence for it. But anyway.
But it's one of the most complete lists of, if you do this, this is the punishment.
Yeah.
All lined up together.
So the code was a collection of laws, and they were inscribed on this huge stone pillar, I guess, back in the 18th century BC. Definitely BC or BCE. I don't know what the difference is. You just say BC.
BC would be before Christ, and BCE would be before Common Era.
So it's BCE. I mean, that's how far back we're talking.
No. They're the same time period. They're just different terms academics use. One would be the traditional Christian dating system, and the other one is a 21st century version of that dating system.
So I'm just going to say BC. We don't need the E. So, I guess one of the most famous things from it, which I know of it predominantly from the Bible, but if you've ever heard an eye for an eye, then you're aware of the influence of Hammurabi's code. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more to it, so we'll continue. As I said, it's one of the earliest legal systems that was ever created, and it had all of, I believe, 282 laws. It covered everything from like family related stuff to trading to like property rights and of course criminal justice, an eye for an eye, and all of this. And it gave something of a framework for Babylonian society, I guess you would say.
So, the way that most people use an eye for an eye, like that specific example, in modern, I don't know, language, it's usually like, oh, this is barbaric and, it's all about vengeance. But in a society where there were no rules, if you were more powerful and you felt like you wanted to punish someone, you could punish them however you wanted. This is establishing a framework that it needs to be an equal punishment to whatever crime has been committed.
Right.
So it's creating a framework where there's standards.
Well, it allowed people to know exactly what was expected of them and what the consequences were if they, broke the rules.
And a line that the punishers weren't supposed to cross.
Yeah.
It needs to be equal to the crime, not above the crime. Not a harsher sentence than whatever damage they've done.
Yeah. What's the word I'm looking for? Proportionality.
Yes.
Yeah. So interesting aspect of Hammurabi's reign, I guess, was that he made a claim to like his divine right to rule. We're familiar with the phrase, the divine right of kings, very commonly associated with, well, a lot of monarchies, but I always associate it for whatever reason with kind of the absolute monarchs of Europe way back in the day,
Although this is an even older understanding of that concept. This is it's a pre-Christian understanding of that idea. So they wouldn't have called it that. They just would have called it the legitimacy of a king is given to him by the gods. In these societies, especially in Mesopotamia, as far as I'm aware, they were all based on the idea that the kings would also act as the high priest of the city's particular god.
Yeah.
So it's a dual position. They're the bridge to the gods, plus they're the protector of the city.
Well, he claimed that that his laws were given to him by a Babylonian god called Shamash, which was the god of sun and justice, and that by presenting the laws as divinely inspired, Hammurabi used that, whether he actually believed it or not. He may have, I don't know. He solidified his authority with his people, and he made it very clear that his rule wasn't just like political. He was a representative of the gods. It was sacred, Anyway, it's a very early example that we're aware of a, I guess in modern terms we'd say a king or a monarch who, it was like religion and politics or governance kind of woven together.
Yeah, it's combining the monopoly on force in the state with a divine legitimacy.
Yes. Anyway, in addition to the code, for which, again, he's most famous, he was also known to be a brilliant military leader and administrator. Two things that someone claiming to represent the gods and being the head of all things, you need to be good at that. You need to be good at fighting, and you need to be good at managing people. That's how I can translate that. During his reign, he successfully unified much of Mesopotamia, creating what we now know as the Babylonian Empire, which is one of the most, I can't think of a more famous, there are many, but that's one of the first that I think of when you say an ancient empire. That's one of the first, one of the biggest. His military campaigns, they expanded his borders, and he he had an ability to manage the empire's resources and the people, as I said, all that administration, which helped bring a lot of prosperity to his area, his region. And he really kind of created or nurtured this state that we would think of. And it was quite thriving for the time, you know. Anyway, let's see here. I'm going through my notes so I don't miss anything. I'm known to miss things sometimes. And then we end the recording. I'm like, dang it, I missed this and this. I can't believe it. Anyway, with respect to his laws, I remember hearing, well, we discussed this at some point when I was in law school. And there's always some comment made about the harshness of the punishments, like the eye for an eye principle and things like that. But it seems as though it wasn't just about punishment just for the sake of it, you know. It was intended to protect the vulnerable in a lot of instances.
Yeah, with proportionality.
Yeah, as you were saying earlier. For example, I believe there were laws that safeguarded, you know, what would be considered the vulnerable, especially in that type of society, which would be women and children and things like that. And some people say, I don't know, that his code was an early attempt at social justice in our modern terms. I don't know. What do you think about that? I find it to be kind of a odd modern interpretation. I don't know that I agree with it, but
I think it was just an attempt to enforce an order on people who, for one of the first times, had been crammed into one space together, and they're trying to figure out how to make everyone work together without constantly having to execute people for thievery and murder.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sort of.
Yeah.
Sure. I don't know if that was their idea, but
I don't think so.
They're just trying to make things work.
Yeah. It's like, this is how things are to be done.
How, you know, I guess equitably that worked out. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still a society where, you know, you can still be a slave.
Yeah.
And most of the people are owned by someone else to one degree or another. And yeah, I mean, there's no specific circumstances for how you knocked somebody's eye out. So say you did it by accident, you're still losing an eye.
Yeah.
So
and it's like protecting women. Like,
I wouldn't want to live under it.
Keeping them from being like beaten to death. Otherwise, I don't know what we're talking about here. Anyways, that was one, you know, comment that I had read, and I thought, I don't know. But
I mean, in the sense that they're trying to make their society work better. Yes.
Like, good for you. Bravo. But
still don't want to live in your country.
Oh, definitely don't want to live. No. But one of the things that I guess at the time was revolutionary was not so much the rules or the laws, like, you know, you can't just go around murdering and pillaging or whatever it is, but the fact that, the way that those laws were made public, the public were made aware of it, that it was inscribed on this huge stone that I spoke about earlier,
implying that it's
put in a public area where everybody
see.
Could see it. It's a very kind of transparent thing for the time. It's not just like Hammurabi sitting on his throne saying this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's out there where everybody can read it,
and then he can change it whenever he wants.
If they notice somebody else isn't following the rules, then everybody will know.
Exactly. And that's supposed to be another one of his, I guess, attempts at fairness or openness or something. I mean, I would say so. To take the time back in those days to chisel all that onto a stone, and then a big one at that, and put it out for everybody to see. It's set in stone, you see? Much harder to change or manipulate or whatever. Like, it says what it says, you know? Anyway, Hammurabi's reign ended in 1750 BC, but of course, he's been much spoken about since then. as we all know, after his death, the empire eventually began to decline, as all empires tend to do. But his code of laws, they continue to influence many civilizations. You know, there's remnants of it all over the world, which is amazing. And it's one of those things that is just really, to me, it's fascinating. It's so fascinating that this code that he dreamed up, because of course I don't, that whole like representative of the gods things. It's like voices in his own head, probably. I don't know. He dreamed all this up, chiseled it in stone thousands of years ago. And here we are sitting here talking about it. Not only that, but it has influenced modern laws, some of them.
And the code could be older than him. But he could be the first one who wrote it down that we found record of.
He probably, I wouldn't be surprised if he took stuff from here and there and put it together the way he thought was best and whatever. Interesting little tidbit that brings us into the 20th century. In 1901, archaeologists discovered the Code of Hammurabi in modern day Iran. On a stone or I wrote this down strangely. Anyways, it remains one of the most well-preserved artifacts from the ancient world, which I thought was really cool. I didn't put down where it is. It might still be in Iran. I don't know. Anyway, so some people think of him as a fierce conqueror. Some people frame him as a
benevolent
visionary
lawgiver.
Yeah, benevolent lawgiver, visionary
social justice warrior,
visionary reformer of some kind, or a ruler sent by the gods, But
being that it's so long ago and we know so little about him, people could really just paint whatever they want.
That's the fun thing about some of this extremely ancient history is there's so many details we don't know about. You can just make it up.
Left to the imagination, at least until we find more information, possibly.
Right. Maybe one of these days. I don't know. But anyway, you can't deny that he definitely shaped the way laws were written and enforced.
And definitely how we see the laws
for
back then.
Generations. And as I said, his influence is felt even today, thousands of years later.
You studied the code in law school.
I did. And that was I graduated I lost track of time.
3 years ago.
3 years ago. Thank you. Yes. So yeah, all in, as recently as, I think it might've been
first year,
second year. I'm trying to remember, which would have been 2020, the year of
5
COVID.
years ago.
Oh, I can't believe that. That is ridiculous and absurd. Oh my gosh. I just don't know where the time went. I really don't. Anyway, that's it for my little bit. I'm sure I could have come up with more, but I tried to condense it down to the interesting things. And I put in a little bit of commentary that I had gathered from other sources. But like when I said the whole social justice thing, it's more like social justice ? I don't know. I'm not saying that's my opinion. That's just some commentators have felt that way about it. Anyway, okay, so Luke, you have Alexander the Great, is that right?
Yes.
Let's do this.
So, since he is a pretty well-known figure in history, and there's a lot of stories and information about him, I'm going to pretty much go over the highlights, and if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. So, things we know about him.
Wait, first,
yes.
I think I asked you this off mic before. Did he style himself the Great?
So that's a title that he was given by the Romans.
Okay.
So that's why he's in this list, because he's not the first king of Macedon. He's not the first Alexander, even of Macedon, but he's the first person we have record of that was given the title the Great by historians after their death.
Yeah, because there are some the greats that called themselves that. So
yes,
which is kind of like wah wah wah. Anyway, continue.
So he was born to Philip of Macedon and Olympia of Epirus.
Wasn't his father assassinated?
Yes, he was.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he wasn't the oldest child in the family, but he was the oldest child of that marriage. So in Macedon, unlike a lot of the Greek cities, polygamy was allowed. So his father had other wives, but his mother was the most important, like in status. So most people thought that he would be the heir.
Chief sister wife.
Kind of, yes.
Yeah, okay.
The only thing that put a slight dent in that as he was growing up is that his parents didn't get along very well after the first couple of years of their marriage, for reasons that are not entirely clear. They both seem to have been pieces of work. Early on in his life, he was integrated into the Macedonian military training. He and the sons of several other noble families were all sort of put together in a unit and trained, and they were also educated together, interestingly enough, by the philosopher Aristotle. He was their primary tutor, you would say. And like I said, so they're being educated together and they're being trained in their military lessons together. So you've got this sort of like unit of Alexander in charge, and then you have all of his lieutenants from all these other families.
All the other wives? Or?
No, just other families.
Okay.
He didn't have any other siblings who were of a close age, or his only brother, who was older than him and really close in age, seems to have had some sort of mental, I don't know,
deficiency,
something. We're not really sure, but he seems to have not been trained in the military, and he was either medical. We don't exactly know what was going on with him. He lived, but he wasn't considered really a contender for the throne or military command. So you've got him and his group of guys, and they're being trained as like the next leaders of Macedon. And you've got his mother constantly telling him that he's going to be king, and his father kind of, it's one of those situations where there seems to be some like insecurity within the royal family, where like his father kind of felt threatened by his own son because his mother seems to have not been quite such a friend to him by this time. So just before his father's death, there's all sorts of talk about him being disinherited and being replaced. And his father had just made a new marriage to a Macedonian lady from a high-ranking family. And the tradition had always been that the oldest son of a Macedonian wife would inherit the throne. So just a few months after this marriage, his father is stabbed to death.
Dispatched.
So ever since then, there's been stories about how, either Alexander had the stabbing arranged or his mother did.
I'm betting on the wife.
That's what a lot of people think. Anyway, we don't actually know. We just know that he was stabbed to death, and Alexander assumed the throne backed by his group of, lieutenants who he'd been raised with.
At the tender age of 20, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, very young. And by that time, he had already been a successful military commander in several of his father's wars, mainly conducted in Greece.
Well, his training must have been, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that, because I know for a fact that they still teach his strategies and stuff in military academies to this day.
I won't really get into all the details, but his father is really responsible for the development of their new style of warfare. It was using a Greek, Greek military units, but doing them in a slightly more flexible way and using some equipment that made them more effective. So like longer spears so they could get at their enemies before their enemies could get at them, and integrating cavalry to support the infantry units. and just some military maneuvers that other people just weren't doing, like being able to turn and flank enemies instead of just charging straight at them and holding a line.
That reminds me.
Which, I mean, the main thing about those is that they just require an incredible amount of training and discipline, which it's not like other people hadn't thought of these things. It's just nobody else had really taken the time to train all of their soldiers to be able to do them effectively without falling apart.
That's interesting. It reminds me of, I guess it would have been the Revolutionary War in this country, when, and I know like later on when, I mean, you're probably familiar if you've ever seen movies involving war with the British Army in like the, I don't know, the 18th century, then you know what I'm talking about. It's like gentleman's warfare where they line everybody up and then just start shooting at each other. And you're just thinking to yourself, what on earth? But then some of the Americans started picking up and learning the tactics of the Native Americans, you know, the attack by surprise and some of the other things that made a lot of sense if you're fighting someone. And they, that was regarded as like cowardly or whatever, but it was like revolutionary war tactics, you know, but it made a lot more sense. Anyway, that's what it makes me think of, you know, when you hear about these,
somebody choosing to not play by the rules everyone else is.
Exactly. Because you want to win.
An advantage. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the whole point of this thing.
So by the time he became king, Macedon had basically subjugated all the Greek states effectively. So there's only really one logical direction to keep going, and that's to move into what is now Turkey and would have been known as Asia Minor. And that's the old Greek colonies that are being ruled by the Persians. Conveniently, since they've been conquered still within memory, he can say, oh, you know, since Macedon, since we're the protectors of the Greeks, we are coming in to free these subjugated people from these, you know, horrible tyrants who have conquered them. So he moves in and very quickly defeats the Persian forces in Western Asia Minor. And basically just decides not to stop. He just continues to attack instead of consolidating his wins or going back or anything. He just keeps going, and the Persian forces just keep falling. He makes it all the way through Asia Minor, all the way down to Syria, and no one stopped him yet. So by the time he makes it into Syria, which is getting close to the Persian heartlands, which at this time weren't actually Persia. They'd moved to center more around the two largest cities in the empire at this time were Babylon and Susa, both within Mesopotamia. And so he's getting a little close to that. So the Persian army sort of pulls together their full force and decides they're gonna take him out. And they get there. The Macedonians are very heavily outnumbered, and they just tear the Persians apart. It's one of those things in history where no one's exactly certain how they were so effective, but it seems to just be the flexibility of their formations were too difficult for the Persians to deal with because they were working with massed troops. And like I said, if you don't have the flexibility, even if you've got the numbers, you can be surrounded and outflanked and it'll break your formations apart. So basically, by the time they notice that they're losing, they've already broken through the front ranks of their army, and and the honor guard surrounding Alexander almost made it to the king of Persia, the great king, his position. So they basically have to decide, so do we stay and fight or do we try to escape? And the king decides he's going to escape. And as soon as he leaves, everybody else in the army stops fighting or runs away. Which is why you don't do that.
The captain going down with the ship type thing.
And worse than that, when he retreats, he leaves his entire baggage train behind, which included virtually the entire royal family, including his mother, his wives, his oldest and most important children, several of the families of other high-ranking Persian nobility. So now Alexander has this huge pool of hostages.
What a guy.
Yeah. Anyway, so
maybe it has something to do with the fact that he believed himself to be descended from Zeus. Alexander did.
Well, yeah. So that's a whole
He was
nother.
said to have believed that. Another descendant of the gods, like Hammurabi.
Well, technically at this point, at least according to all the stories we have, he didn't believe that yet.
Oh, really? It wasn't a lifelong thing?
Well, his mother claimed this, but we're not sure if she started claiming it later or if she'd already been saying it at this time.
Okay.
Because it gets a little tricky, like if she'd been saying it while his father was still alive. It's a little awkward. So, like I said, he captures the Persian royal family and they move straight to Babylon. No stops after this battle. Straight into the capital. There's no battle. They walk straight in. The great king has already fled to go deeper into the old Persian heartland, away from Mesopotamia. And they've basically won the war against the largest empire on earth at the time. The other thing that somewhat helps this, at least some people think, is that since the Persians had conquered Mesopotamia, it's not the locals didn't necessarily want to be conquered.
Well, as locals tend not to want to be.
This conquest had only existed for it's about 250 years. So it's still like they can still remember like back, in great grandfather's day when we were free. And he's sort of presenting himself as a liberator of all the peoples that the Persians had conquered, starting with the Greeks and now the people in Mesopotamia.
Well, that's interesting you say that because I believe I read that his army was made up of people, Macedonians, Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, and even some Indians.
Yes.
Interesting mix.
Well, basically, as the conquests go, he picks up units from every region he conquers, which kind of tells you something about how he worked with people.
That's what
it seems like he was somebody that they were willing to follow, even though they didn't know him.
Yeah.
Either they were just like, this guy's a winner, or he seemed like somebody they wanted to work for.
Is that like a Svengali type of thing?
Something.
Every once in a while, a person like that comes along and they just have this, this power, this charisma. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, basically, just a long story short, eventually they do catch up with the Persian king, and conveniently enough, they don't actually have to deal with him because some of his supporters who had gone with him murdered him.
Oh, they had
and then just took off into what is now Afghanistan. So that was actually pretty convenient for Alexander since he doesn't have to be the bad guy who murdered the Persian king. Also, interestingly enough, after the capture of the Persian royal family, he treated them really well. So he ended up having the support of both the previous great king's mother and his oldest daughter, who he ended up marrying.
Yep, Svengali. There's something going on here. How in the world?
Basically, at least within the Greek reports, it's that he just treated them really well and they appreciated that. And then he didn't actually kill their son/father. So they were just like, okay, fine. It seems like you're in charge now. We'll work with you.
Well, that is kind of amazing.
Yeah. During this time period, he also completed the conquest of the Levant. So everything from Syria down to the Sinai. He invaded Egypt and took out the Persian forces that were still holding out there. He founded a bunch of cities along the way. Egypt is interesting because it's another place where they had been subjugated by the Persians and Persian rule was not popular. But for some reason, they seemed happier to accept this other foreigner and his rule instead.
I guess because he was just nicer to them, as you say. Is that the key to
No
all of
clue
this?
exactly. As far as we can tell, the Persians weren't particularly cruel or disrespectful to them, but they seemed to take to Alexander. And then we had, and especially in Egypt, you had several sort of cult centers for the Egyptian gods coming out and as tradition, declaring, oh yes, you're the chosen of this particular god. And, you know, oh, you're the new Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
And what you were talking about with the whole descended from Zeus, while he's on his sort of vacation in Egypt, he decides to go to a very well-known oasis out in the desert. It's well known because it's the site of an oracle. And this particular oracle is accepted by both the Egyptian religion, it's theirs to begin with, but it has been folded into the Greek religious pantheon. They consider it to be a part of their own belief system. So it's considered to be both the oracle of Zeus and the oracle of Ra. Horus / I mean, like, they're all kind of there, all the different Egyptian ones. But when he goes there, the priests specifically tell him, oh yeah, by the way, you're the son of the god of our oracle. So in the Greek understanding, Zeus; in their understanding, the king of the gods in Egypt.
This is all kinds of mixed up.
Oh, it's all kinds of mixed up, but they're giving him like all the prizes. So, like I said, does that, goes back, founds Alexandria on the coast of the Mediterranean. So kind of linking Egypt to the Greek world officially.
Known for the library that burned down.
Yes.
Sadly.
And then he moves back to his now pretty much main imperial base, which is Babylon, and decides he's going to go and subjugate the last of the old Persian imperial lands, which is Afghanistan and what is now Iran. Iran folds in pretty easily because, like I said, through the support of both the previous king's mother and his other family members, he's pulled in most of the Persian nobility. And they basically accepted his rule. So then the only issue is what is now mainly Afghanistan, what they would have called Sogdia. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but that's what I've heard it pronounced. And it's a much more fractured area of the empire. But he decides he needs to go there and conquer it, mainly because the previous lieutenant of the great king who murdered him has claimed that he's now the great king.
Of course.
So you can't leave an alternative ruler hanging out there. So he goes,
loose ends and all that,
fights in the mountains and in the valleys and all over that part of the world, crosses over into what they would have called India, but what we would now call Pakistan. So the land of the Indus River. So India. Fights there, conquers land. And at this point, his armies, especially the Macedonian and Greek contingents, they've been away from home for almost 10 years. And when they left home, they were going to conquer the previously, Greek city-states in Asia Minor. And now they're in Pakistan. So a lot of them are wanting to go home.
Understandable.
So
10 years that's a long time.
So basically,
especially
the story
when you don't
is
have FaceTime or whatever.
So they don't know how many of their family members are still alive or, what's going on back home. I mean, there's some communication, but they haven't been there. So the story is basically they'd all just say, we're done. We're going home. He wants to continue and keep going into what we know as India. And just keep going. He thinks that he can just make it all the way to wherever the limits of the continent is. They're not sure where that is because old maps had always shown the land ending just beyond the Indus River. But now they know there's so much more past that, which seems to be what the men have decided. Okay, there's more. We want to go home now. And he's thinking, there's more. We can keep fighting.
Of course.
Yeah. So numbers win in this battle. So they're going home.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't seem to have been very happy about it. They, for some reason, people have said maybe he's trying to punish the army. They take possibly the worst route home. They go through the southern deserts of what's now Iran. So extremely dry and hot in the summer.
Oh.
And some people think that it was meant to keep them in contact with their naval force, but the Navy was either blown off course or they lost contact in some other way, or that he was just doing it to punish the soldiers for not following his orders. So a large percentage of the army dies going back home. But they survive and they get back.
Some of them do.
Yeah. And they make it back to Susa and then Babylon. From there, it's pretty much just kind of winding down. There's not a whole lot longer before his death. He starts to become unpopular with the more Greek and Macedonian contingents of his court and military because they think he's going native and becoming too Persian.
Oh.
And he seems kind of bored. He doesn't have anything to do.
He spent all this time conquering and now.
Yeah, 10 years. And now he's just supposed to rule.
Mm-hmm.
So he ends up dying of a fever or some unknown, specifically medical condition outside of Babylon when he's 32.
Yeah. Wow. So only 12 years. All that happened in 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I read that there are different theories about his death.
Yeah. Some people think he was poisoned. Some people think it was old wounds. Some people think it was malaria. I mean, it's the ancient world. A lot of things could kill you.
I could easily believe it was some kind of disease or wound or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know, but it doesn't seem as though, like you said, he was becoming unpopular with certain contingents, but it doesn't sound like it was to the point where people were ready to like dispatch him. I mean, I don't know, but
well, you know how I told you about how he had that like group of friends who he, was raised with and trained with. Well, you know how I said that some of the Macedonians thought he was becoming too Persian and like he wasn't one of them anymore. Well, one of them got a little too insulting and he stabbed him to death in front of everybody else. Oh. So it had already gone pretty far.
That's
before he
unfortunate.
died.
Well, interesting. There's I don't know much about this, but apparently there's a horse that was very special to him.
Yes.
And it's some symbol that he's associated with. That what was the name of I don't know the name of the horse. Starts with a B. Mm-hmm. Anyways. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting.
Remember the name of the horse?
Interesting little tidbit. Let me see if I can
Bucephalus?
Let's see here. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yes. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how I've heard it.
Anyway, supposedly he was very loyal and
he
strong.
named several cities after him.
Yeah, and that
he named cities after himself and his horse.
His dear companion. He probably had multiple wives and girlfriends and who knows what. And
he did.
He named everything after his horse.
And him.
That's so typical. It's just so typical of somebody like that. So funny. Like if he had a dog, maybe it would have been the same thing. Yeah. Like everything would have been named after Fido or whatever. Whatever the generic dog name was for Macedonians. Anyways, okay. So at the ripe old age of 32, he succumbs to whatever it was. And that's
he makes one of, not quite, right before he dies, at least according to the stories, he makes one of the more controversial decisions of any empire builder has ever made, when his attendants come to him and say, who should rule? Mm-hmm. The stories say that his answer was the strongest, which is not very specific.
Very open
and
to
sounds
interpretation.
like asking for trouble.
Yeah. Because everyone's like, oh, that's me. Right.
Yes, exactly. And at this time, he has 2 of his wives are pregnant. Well, no, one had already just given birth, but like months old baby.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is still pregnant. So you have people immediately form up around them and say, okay, we've got the new heir,
Mm-hmm.
but different wives,
He
different
didn't have any
allegiances.
other children prior
Nope,
to that?
only the 2.
Well,
that we know of.
He was so busy conquering, he didn't have time for that sort of thing. I get it. Okay.
Yeah. And the 2 wives have very different allegiances. One of them is from a Persian background. The other one is a Sogdian background.
Mm.
Neither of them really managed to get too much support behind them because they both sort of team up with generals and other supporters from his army.
Mm.
And the people they team up with end up just deciding, well, I think I'm really better at this than you are. So they both end up dead. And the children. So,
Aww.
yeah.
I was hoping you weren't going to say that.
Yeah. So the empire splits up into many different states and territories ruled over by the major generals and, powerful figures that had served under Alexander.
Mm.
You've got, famously, Egypt goes to his general Ptolemy, and his mother makes a stab at ruling Macedon, putting up his older brother, the one that we're not really sure what was going on with him, but he seems to have had some sort of mental or medical issue. So she puts him up as a figurehead, and she's going to rule Macedon, temporarily at least. You've got other generals who are setting up in Babylon. You've got some setting up in, the area that's now Syria. Just everything blows apart when he's like, yeah, the strongest will rule it.
I feel like I should know this, but the Ptolemy you spoke of, is that the same in
He's the
regards
first
to the
one.
Ptolemaic
Yes.
system? Okay.
Well, no, that's a descendant.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I don't remember
The theory
that.
of the solar system.
Yeah.
That's
the only
different.
way I know that name is in association with
So,
that.
for context, this Ptolemy would be the ancestor of Cleopatra.
The Cleopatra that we know of famously.
Yes.
There are many.
Well,
there were many Cleopatras.
All of the Cleopatras of Egypt would be his descendants.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes.
It's all so interconnected.
So he goes through this, wildfire conquering spree and then dies, and it all shatters apart.
Mm.
But while shattering apart, it creates a completely different political and social configuration for the Middle East and Greek worlds, which sets up the groundwork for the Romans to conquer in just a few hundred years.
And that's a whole nother can of worms, a whole
Oh,
nother
yes.
story.
But so he dies young, so he didn't really have any downhill, losing territory, losing battles. He was always successful as far as he got, and
Kind of went out in a blaze of glory.
exactly.
sort of.
So that's kind of what he becomes known for.
Minus the stabbing his friend thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little unhinged. I don't know.
A little,
Just-
but his role model or hero out of the Greek, tradition was Achilles.
Yes.
From the Trojan War,
Mhm.
who was, the story with him is that his parents were given the choice. He can either be famous and be famous for all time, but die very young,
Mhm.
or he can live a very long time and no one will know about him. And he died young and he was famous. And that seems to have been Alexander's goal.
Really?
Yeah. And like you were saying with the whole descendant of Zeus, so his father's family claimed to be the descendants of Hercules or Heracles in the Greek understanding. And his mother's family claimed to be the descendants of Achilles.
His philosophy. I don't remember where I heard this line. Die young, make a pretty corpse. I don't know where. Anyway, that seems to be it, huh?
Yeah.
He achieved it. There you go.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess. I don't know what he looked like, but
Oh, sure.
whatever.
After all that fighting and everything.
Yeah, it couldn't have been all that pretty. Anyways, well, that is fascinating. All
Yeah.
of that is interesting. And, you know, he's one of the people that you certainly don't get through school without reading about, but I didn't know all of those details.
Yeah, and that's just like the barest bones of the story. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of detail. I mean, we don't know that it's all accurate, but we have a lot of different accounts that are either from the period or from not too long after.
Yeah.
And of course, the Romans loved him because, you know, he conquered
All the
everybody.
conquering,
It was
yes.
like, this guy's the best.
Yeah. You're simply the best.
Yes.
Better than all the rest. I just
Yeah.
made that up right now. Can you believe that? Going to business as a
No
songwriter.
copyright infringement at all.
Shh. Luke. Anyway. All right. Well, is that it for today?
That's everything I have prepared.
It's all I have prepared. Okay. Well, all right. In that case, I guess we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. As always, your time. If you're not already, follow us on, I got to list it off, TikTok, Facebook, X, Instagram, and of course,
YouTube.
right here on YouTube. Subscribe, turn on notifications. We're going to do our best to get better about putting out more podcast episodes.
And things will be slowing down now that we're moving into later spring and summer.
Yes,
which is our slow
The
season.
snowbirds are leaving. So, yeah. All right.
Which,
anyway.
you know,
Yeah.
we love having the business, but it's not great for our podcasting schedule.
True. Anyway, thanks for listening. We will see you again next time for the third installment of Firsts.
Bye.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and follow us on social media for news and latest updates.
Until next time, bye.
The Royal Chronicles is written and produced by Hannah Mohana and Luke Haney. Executive producer Mustafa Mohana.